Well, good morning, YouTubers. I'm going to talk about something that is called the Roman Captivity of the Church by the Orthodox. And this generally refers to the introduction of the doctrine of the atonement, which is in fact taught by St. John Casson in explaining why 6-hour prayers are offered, and other early fathers. It's just, and St. Athanasius. It's just that it is not as narrow focused and mechanistic as St. Anselm rendered it. But it seems that from Catherine the Great, a little bit before his time on, most education, including seminary in Russia, was done by Jesuits. Now, this influenced the iconography, it often having a more Western naturalistic flavor, and it notions about purgatory as a separate place from hell, and about a kind of mechanistic collection of merits of saints that was transferable to believers, and some other notions of similar nature started circulating. So that when Peter Mogila was making his catechism, it included some of this, and it was reviewed by the Synod of Yassi before it was allowed to be published, and they removed the stuff that was Latin in origin. Purgatory, merits of saints, mechanistically storehoused and transferable and stuff, and maybe a couple other things, but substitutionary atonement was not ruled out. Now, substitutionary atonement is denounced as a strictly juridic thing, which is artificial and fictional, legal fiction. Jesus' righteousness is ascribed to the believer's unrighteousness ascribed to him on the cross, and no actual ontological change made, no a change in the believer themselves to any extent or beginning of such, and the Protestants take it even farther, to the point in some cases once saved, always saved, and that sort of nonsense. All of these things are not biblical. The Calvinists are far worse than the Lutherans that have influenced most of, especially American Protestantism. This mechanistic kind of thinking is a straight grab off of Latin scholasticism, which itself, exemplified by Aquinas, to some extent has origins in Augustine. Now, systematic reviews of theology and so on, you see St. John of Damascus doing this, but Augustine, Aquinas is the one who really, then there's also the problem of the difference between understanding of God as being, they confuse essence with actions, because they overdo the divine simplicity thing and are far more influenced by pagan philosophy than the Eastern Orthodox or the early fathers were. And so, and there was a couple other things. Many canons, at least 3, I think, prohibit eating meat that has not been exsanguinated at all, and adding blood into meat dishes, any dish, broth, gravy, whatever, blood sausage, for example, is prohibited. Now, this is not a continuation of Moses. This goes back to Noah. And the apostles in Acts chapter 15 said that the Gentile converts were not to be burdened with anything other than this, that they avoid fornication, which is a catch-all term that covers every conceivable kind of sexual evil, not just non-marital sex. And it would include adultery. And it would include incest, would include homosexuality, homosexual acts, etc. Regardless of what role is played, it's still a sexual act with a member of the same sex. So people who think that it's only that passive element. The one who plays the female role is the only fag, and the male role player is not, is just dead wrong. And our Sarnacotes refers to this male role player, mistranslated as, translated as abusers of themselves and mankind, but misviewed as masturbation, which has nothing to do with it. Now, though in fact, oral sex, even heterosexual between married couples, at times was illegal in some states, based on, and it's still referred to by some people as sodomy, and the analysis of homosexuality is bad because it's sterile, is based on a confusion on the one hand between, something isn't sodomy unless it's between the same sexes, okay? Now, anal sex is strictly out, but oral sex is not. Deep throating it is definitely not the same thing as sodomy that was listed as that in some law codes. Now, simply because gays do it doesn't mean it is essentially itself gay. To brand homosexuality as evil because sterile and all non-reproductive sex is essentially the same as homosexuality, because sterile is insane, and based on, again, Roman Catholic confusions, partly introduced by, or helped along by Augustine, and Tertullian is considered the father of Latin Christianity, and he's not a church father. Why? Because he became a heretic. In Leviticus, when it prohibits lying with a man as you would with a woman, for this is abomination to the Lord. Well, how would you lie with a man as you would a woman? A man doesn't have a vagina. Okay, we're talking about other orifices and or non-penetrating forms of sexual eroticism, like petting to orgasm, whatever. Obviously, these things were known, were done, and are not condemned as long as they are heterosexual. Rachel was referred to as a virgin, Betula, that's the exact time, and no man had known her. Two separate issues. The notion of the only purpose of sex being reproductive is unbiblical, and it is only once in the Bible is it listed as a primary reason for its existence. God said, why did he make the two one? So you could have a godly seed. But that's God's focus and interest in the creation of sexuality. He housed it in a context of relationship and desire. Genesis 2:18 speaks of the need of man for a companion, and Augustine goes, well, how can a woman be any help to man except in reproduction? But the word is ezer neged, ezer, a partner type helper. This word's even used for God is my helper occasionally. It is neged is face to face, like man to man, can mean opposition, can mean friendship. This is not, the whole notion of role playing on the one hand, and the whole thing is strictly for reproduction. That's not the attitude that the human is to take. They focus on each other, on the relationship, and the sexuality flows from this. It is not, when you have, what they call, some people call repro sex, there's two stories involving incest, actual incest, constructive. Tamar, the daughter-in-law of Judah, who tricked him into sex, both of the Levirate marriage system, which was first condemned and then tolerated if the two brothers, which would include half-brothers, first cousins, were living together at the time of the death of the widow's husband, and he could still refuse her. Was obviously, all these things were oriented around solely reproductive focused sexuality, which was not something God apparently really liked. Now, the Roman Church eliminated the epiclesis from their liturgy, or the Mass. This is where the Holy Spirit is invoked to make the change in the bread and wine into the body and blood of Christ, after the words of institution, this is my body, this is my blood. In the Roman system, Holy Spirit is invoked to bless the bread and wine in order that they may become, they acquire the ability to become the body and blood of Christ. Then is the priest's power requiring ordination that is supposed to do it. And the priest is supposed to be the icon of Christ. Now, it was explained to me in an OCA church, the priest's hands are the hands of Christ during the Eucharist. The priestess icon of Christ didn't even come into play in an earlier argument against those who would have female ordination. It was other issues that were brought up. Apparently it's a later development of those lines of thought, but it is part and parcel of what would do without the epiclesis. It is therefore inappropriate within an Orthodox concept, and yet in the Antiochian webpage, I noticed that the priestess is the icon of Christ. Fasting is prohibited by canons on Saturday and Sunday. Only one Saturday in the year, Holy Saturday, is there to be fasting. That means even during Lent, you're supposed to break on weekends. And yet gradually, it has become the Roman practice, fasting on Saturdays, which was one of the issues brought up in the statement by St. Photius the Great against the Roman system in, I think it was 88-67. Among the list of the problems was fasting on Saturday. And yet this is now done. There's also the Wednesday, Friday fast. Wednesday's in mourning for the conspiracy against Christ, Friday for his suffering. And yet I noticed on the calendar, the Greek Orthodox calendar, that there are some Wednesdays that are not fasting days because of some saint or whatever. Things have gotten changed around a bit. And you have Barlamism is essentially Roman scholasticism, and considers that it confuses it equates the energies with the essence of God, the energy of the actions of God with his essence, whereas certainly his essence, his nature, shows forth to some extent, that dictates his actions, but they are not the same as these. And the Roman confusion of the two is what is called Barlamism. Barlaam opposed Palamas, and St. John Gregory Palamas in a classical dispute was eventually settled by a synod in favor of Palamas. And Palamas' position is the distinctions between the energies and the essence of God. The energies is knowable, the essence is not. Transubstantiation, though it is held, of course, that there is a change of the bread and wine to the body and blood of Christ by the East, is a notion of being able to rationally determine exactly when, where, why, and how, and who by the transformation is done. And that there's a change in substance with only accents or appearance remaining. Now, the calendar, I notice, allows... It says their idea of not fasting on Saturdays is to allow wine. And this is so you can have the Holy Eucharist. Well, this is implying that there is at least some wine left in the Eucharist once it's been consecrated. So the implications of this definition or redefinition are either heretical or bespeaks that the notion of total transformation, eradicating all trace of bread and wine except by appearance only, is not in fact correct. However, fasting on Saturdays and fasting on Sundays and yet there must be no fasting on Sundays because it's like a mini Easter, a mini Pascha. That's the day the Lord rose. Another problem is the idea of purgatory as a separate area from hell, and the mechanistic piling up and collecting in a treasury of the merits of the saints is transferable to the believers, and a lot of mechanistic type of thinking. And this is essentially the Latin influence is far greater. They're even treating the filioque as not all that important, when in fact it is. is far greater than this ridiculous concern that the atonement doctrine, which, granted, the way Anselm did was far too narrow and focused and shallow to be, it's problematic the way he does it. There's more than our forgiveness. There's a whole cosmic reset was done then to be fulfilled, brought to fruition later. It is a restoration of all of creation, a new heavens and new earth, as Revelation says. So it's like there's a more serious presence of Roman influence than merely some idea of the atonement or something. And this is never addressed. Blood, eating blood with the meat with the blood in it. The Acts 15 Council said that believers were to avoid fornication, avoid bloodshed, avoid eating things sacrificed to idols, and avoid eating meat from something that had been strangled. In other words, no exsanguination at all. And so you have blood sausage and blood being added into broths and gravies to improve the flavor in the West. And increasingly there's some Orthodox who are careless on all this, and they say, oh, well, that's just some Islamic concern. No, it isn't. This isn't a Mosaic-specific thing that is superseding Christ like the food laws. This goes back to Noah. And the basis for it is that the blood is the life of the animal, the soul of the animal, and it atones for our sins. Now, all the prohibitions on blood eating, however, are in context of food as in a dead animal. The first Eucharist was done by Jesus while he was still alive, before he was crucified, and then all the others were subsequent to his resurrection. He's alive again. So this blood comes from a living being, and not the same issue. Anyway, there's a lot more Roman influence than its detractors make out there to be.